the epoxy demo. This is my demo. You got epoxy containers. That's it, thank you. I brought in a few pieces that I did finish with epoxy just to show you where we're getting or where we're going. This is the type of finish that you get with epoxy, and it's hard. Pepper mill that we use every day at home. You see the pepper coming out, and it still looks like new, even though it's been, I don't know, 3-4 years I've had it. This was a burl that I finished with epoxy, and you can eat in it. This one, I think I'm off camera, I brought in last week. It's not finished with epoxy, only the rim is, and it was colored. So we'll do a bit of explanation on how to color the epoxy. So this is what epoxy is for me, because the epoxy I use is only to finish, to make a nice finish, glass finish. At the end, if you have any questions, Bob Stone will talk about West System epoxy, which doesn't give you this finish because it's not as transparent and it has a different purpose. So if you have questions, Bob will answer them. So, how do we do this? We buy epoxy. Where do we buy epoxy? Anywhere. But if you want the right one, I buy from Les Produits Chimiques Citadel. I printed, I think I've got 20 pieces of paper with the name of the company and the phone number. I'll put them on the corner of the table there. So if you feel that you're going to be trying epoxy eventually, take one. They're from near Three Rivers, and they deliver by truck. You order and the next day you get it. It costs around $80 for 2 1-liter canisters. Now, when you're working with epoxy, trying to pour from a quart of paint is pretty awkward. So what I do is I take a liter bottle of wine and I pour my epoxy in it. So whenever I have to pour a small quantity, it is easier to do. But even at that, this is pretty big, because if you want the epoxy to spread evenly, you have to heat it up to make it more liquid. And how do we heat it up? In a homemade heater. Quite an invention. 2 quarts of paint. On the bottom part, I have a light fixture with a light bulb. 25 watts is enough to warm up the epoxy. It's all you need, 25 watts. Don't put up 100, it's going to be too hot. If you're doing production, you can leave it warming up for days, no problem. Like when I'm making my pepper mills, I can be working on it for a week, so I leave it on day and night, and no problem. The next day I come in, it's warm. What is heating in there, beside the light bulb, is smaller containers of epoxy. So I go from my quart to these small containers that fit in here so they can warm up. When I'm pouring the epoxy into this, I have to heat it up first. This is very thick. So I just put it on the baseboard for an hour or so, and it heats up. It's easier to pour into these smaller ones. Once they're in there, you got to transfer them in something else because you want to mix them now. What do I use? These little 1 ounce cup from Lee Valley. They have some at the dollar store, but there's no measurements on it. So with this, it's fairly easy. If you put it on a flat surface, you put, let's say, 2 grams of one and 2 grams of the other. It's 1 to 1, the ratio.
By weight or by volume?
By volume. And you got a lot of play. By eye is good enough. You don't have to go crazy about it. Now, preparing the wood, the nice thing about the epoxy is it doesn't have to be soft like the finished product. You can sand it down to 80 grit, and that's enough. The epoxy will do the rest. But epoxy won't do everything. Won't do miracles. On this piece, I've circled marks in the wood. The wood is damaged. For tonight, we're going to do it with epoxy, but you shouldn't be doing it. The reason is the epoxy won't go into the holes and then make a flat surface. It won't. When it dries, it's still going to leave a hole, a dent at least. So you want to avoid that. The easiest way to do it is prepare a small batch of epoxy, put it in here. You put it in your lathe. Okay, so you put epoxy in the holes and you turn the lathe on at the slowest speed as possible. Because all we want to do is we let it turn for the epoxy to dry. It's gonna take a while. So you gotta turn it for about 12 hours. And after 12 hours, you still let it dry. And then you come and sand it with your 80 grit paper. Just to make everything flat. Now you can apply the epoxy, the second coat. Well, the first coat, really. The first one was only to block the holes. So this stuff won't need much. I'll put 7.5 millimeters of each. The epoxy and the hardener. And we'll do something different with this one. How about if we do some color? So 7.5. Beep. 7.5. I'm gonna add a little color to it, just for fun. Actually, it's only to show you what you can do with coloring, because it won't be nice, but hey. This is a color pigment I got at Langevin Forêt. They've got all kinds of color. I thought it was pretty cool. Oh, doesn't take much. I'll mix it with the epoxy first because the epoxy is clearer than the hardener, so mix is easier. So up to 15. Make sure it's mixed properly. I don't blend it. I mix it, turning around, trying not to make bubbles. Now I just apply it on. One thing you have to do is make it thick enough. Don't try to save money on epoxy. I didn't put much pigment in it. But it's okay. Here I had marked a knot that I have fixed with CA glue. I don't know if you see it. Here. Fix it with CA glue too, because I don't want to mix a small batch for a small nut like that. So CA glue did the job. I guess you're not wondering why I have a piece of plywood underneath here? You can guess. Okay. I'll try to make it even all over. I've got epoxy all over. I turn the lid on. By itself. When you're done applying the epoxy, you wash your piece. You look at it. Are there any bubbles? Are there any bubbles? I don't have my glasses on, so I don't see any bubbles. No, it looks good, unfortunately. But if there were bubbles, I'd use the heat gun. Heat gun can damage epoxy. If you heat it too much, it's just gonna drip on your beverage. So if there's a bubble, all I do is do it like that. I don't stop on it, I don't heat one place, I don't heat everything, it's gonna make everything too liquid. I just go and the bubble disappears. Can you do that? You can do that? Good. Okay, and of course, if I had a piece of wood or something, I would use this pin, or even a bubble. You can try piercing a bubble if it's a big one. If it's a small one, the heat gun will take care of it. This is a motor from
Barbecue.
the barbecue. I mount it on a piece of wood. And it turns approximately 2.5 RPMs. So that's really slow. Chuck that I've adapted. I rarely get the finish that I want, especially on plywood. Plywood is terrible. You get all kinds of bubbles with plywood. There's voids, and on a piece of wood you can do it with one coat if you're very careful. Like I did on the other one, I probably could get away, on the first one, I probably could have gotten away with only one coat. And we'll try to do a nice job on this one too. It's a good thing we have a mat on the floor. If I leave the heat on, you're going to see a bunch of bubbles coming out. But it's spreading the epoxy away. The ventilation is putting the epoxy away because it's too liquid, and it leaves me a spot without epoxy. And of course it's going to show on my finished piece. So that's why you only go, you see a bubble, you do. That's all you do. Well, that's it. That's how we do epoxy.
Basically, I'm here to